Have you ever wondered why some people are instantly respected without saying much at all? What if the secret to influence and connection isn't speaking, but listening? Before we begin, if you believe in self-improvement and personal growth, hit that subscribe button, because today we're exploring a hidden superpower, the art of active listening. 1. The silent power of listening. Most people think power comes from words, bold speeches, sharp opinions, strong voices, but those who truly understand life know this. Listening is the purest form of respect. In an age where everyone wants to speak, post, and proclaim, silence becomes a rare and radical act. The Stoics, who lived centuries ago, already knew this truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. For I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed." To be capable of being proven wrong, one must first have the humility to listen. Listening is not weakness. It is strength in its most disciplined form. To listen is to surrender the ego, to hold back the impulse to dominate or correct, and to instead absorb what reality or another human being is offering. When you listen deeply, you are not just collecting sounds. You are observing the unspoken, sensing the pauses, and witnessing the subtle tremors of emotion that live between words. True listening transforms you into a mirror, reflecting the essence of another person without distortion. Think of the power in a moment of shared silence. In conversation, silence often feels uncomfortable, but that discomfort is where understanding is born. The Stoics called this inner restraint sophrosine, the harmony of self-control and wisdom. When you listen, you are practicing restraint not only in your speech, but also in your judgment. You are allowing truth to emerge naturally, rather than forcing it through the noise of your own opinions. You become the calm center of the storm, the one who can discern meaning amid chaos. Marcus Aurelius often wrote to himself as a form of listening, to his conscience, to reason, to nature. He didn't fill his days with endless debate. He turned inward, listened to the quiet voice within, and measured his responses against virtue. In a world obsessed with expression, there is immense dignity in stillness. The one who listens learns more than the one who talks. The one who observes understands the hidden structure of things. Power doesn't belong to the loudest. It belongs to the most attentive. To listen is to step out of yourself. It's an act of generosity, a form of love. When you listen, you acknowledge another person's existence fully, without distraction, without agenda. The Stoics saw all humans as part of one rational order, one community of souls. By listening, you align yourself with that cosmic unity. You recognize the divine spark in another. Listening, then, is not merely a social skill, it is a spiritual discipline. It requires patience, humility, and presence. It is the art of giving space, the art of receiving wisdom, the art of becoming silent so that truth can speak. 2. Respect is born from being heard. People remember how you make them feel, and nothing feels better than being heard. When someone truly listens to you, without judgment, without interruption, it feels as though the world has stopped to make space for your soul. That feeling is rare, and that's why it carries such weight. Respect doesn't come from dominance, it comes from recognition. To recognize someone's voice is to affirm their humanity. And when you give someone your attention, you give them value, the kind of value no money or title can replace. Attention is the purest currency of respect. The Stoics believed that virtue consists in how we treat others, not in how others treat us. When Epictetus spoke to his students, he reminded them that every interaction is a test of character. The way we listen determines the kind of world we create around us. If we listen carelessly, we breed misunderstanding. If we listen patiently, we cultivate harmony. Listening is therefore not passive. It is an act of creation. It builds bridges where ego builds walls. When people feel heard, they stop fighting to be seen. Most conflict, in essence, is a struggle for recognition. In friendships, families, and even nations, peace begins when one side listens without the need to win. The Stoic approach to relationships was grounded in empathy, guided by reason, and tempered by humility. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Whenever someone does you wrong, immediately consider what view of good or evil led him to do it. Once you see that, you'll pity him and feel neither anger nor surprise." To see another's perspective, one must first listen with compassion. Respect grows in silence, not noise. It's not about asserting superiority, but about acknowledging equality. The greatest leaders in history were often the best listeners. They knew that wisdom flows upward from the ground, not downward from the throne. When you give your full attention to someone, you communicate, "You matter." That simple gesture can dissolve resentment, inspire loyalty, and heal invisible wounds. Respect born from listening lasts longer than fear born from authority. In the end, being heard is not about volume, it's about presence. People don't crave your advice as much as they crave your understanding. The one who listens becomes a refuge for others, a place of calm in a world that constantly demands attention but rarely offers it. Listening teaches us that respect is not given by titles or demanded by force. It is earned, moment by moment, by the depth of our presence. To listen is to honor the divine dialogue of life itself. 3. How to listen like a Stoic. Here's how to master active listening. Maintain eye contact. It tells the other person, "I'm here with you." Nod and engage. Small gestures show empathy without interrupting. Ask questions. It proves you care enough to understand, not just respond. These are simple techniques, yet when done with sincerity, they transform ordinary communication into a sacred exchange of understanding. But Stoic listening goes deeper than etiquette. It is a mindset. The Stoic listener enters each conversation as a student, not a judge. They approach dialogue not as a battlefield, but as a classroom. Epictetus, himself once a slave, said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." This was not a call for silence alone. It was a reminder that listening is a practice of proportion. A wise person balances expression with reception, speech with silence. To listen like a Stoic, begin by suspending judgment. Don't rush to classify what you hear as right or wrong, smart or foolish. The Stoics taught that perception is often distorted by passion and bias. True listening, therefore, requires detachment, not coldness, but clarity. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion." When you set aside the need to react, you create space to truly understand. Listening becomes meditation in motion. Next, engage with empathy. Try to hear not only the words, but the world behind them. Every person carries invisible burdens, and their speech is often the echo of their struggles. A Stoic listener recognizes this and responds with patience rather than pride. They listen not to argue, but to align. They ask gentle questions that invite reflection rather than resistance. In this way, listening becomes an act of service, a gift of attention that elevates both parties. Finally, reflect before responding. When you pause, you allow wisdom to catch up with emotion. The Stoics practiced this through journaling and daily reflection, turning experience into insight. In the same way, thoughtful silence gives meaning to speech. Listening isn't about waiting for your turn to talk, it's about making space for truth to unfold in silence. And in that silence, you may discover something profound, that every voice, no matter how different from your own, is a fragment of the same universal reason that binds all humanity. To listen like a Stoic, then, is not merely to hear, it is to understand, to connect, and to grow. 4. A lesson from a mentor. Many years ago, I had a mentor who was not the loudest voice in the room, but somehow always the most respected. In meetings, while others rushed to assert their opinions, to fill the air with their certainty, he would sit quietly, hands folded, eyes calm but attentive. He rarely interrupted. He rarely competed for attention. Yet when he finally did speak, the entire room fell silent. His words carried a strange kind of gravity, not because they were dramatic or grand, but because they were distilled. You could feel that each syllable had been weighed, considered, and refined by patience. That was his power, restraint. He once told me, "Most people listen only to prepare their reply, they do not listen to understand." That line struck me deeply. He saw listening not as a passive act, but as a discipline, a way of engaging reality with humility. He would spend the first half of any discussion simply absorbing, noting who spoke from ego, who spoke from sincerity, who spoke without thinking at all. He would later say that silence is the crucible in which true understanding forms. In his stillness, he could see beneath the surface of words, down to the intentions beneath them. It was not that he lacked opinions. On the contrary, he was brilliant, decisive, and deeply insightful. But he believed that truth needed space to reveal itself. He often quoted Epictetus, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we may listen twice as much as we speak." He lived by that, and in doing so, he demonstrated that influence is not about dominance, it is about presence. His calm attention made others more thoughtful, more deliberate. In his company, even the most talkative became more measured, as if his composure invited everyone to elevate themselves. Once, during a particularly tense meeting where tempers were flaring, he remained completely silent. I watched him observing, unshaken. When everyone else had exhausted their words, he spoke just 1 sentence. "It seems we're arguing to be right, not to find what's true." The entire discussion stopped. That single line reset the tone. It was as if he had placed a mirror before each of us. We suddenly realized how much noise we had created out of ego, not purpose. His silence had given birth to clarity. Over time, I began to understand that his restraint came from inner discipline, not timidity. Silence was not his weakness, it was his wisdom. He had mastered the art of listening deeply, not only to others, but also to himself. He would pause before responding, as if checking whether his words were truly necessary. He used to say, "Words are like arrows. Once released, you cannot recall them. Aim with care." This was not just advice on communication. It was a philosophy of living. To listen first, to respond with intention, to speak only when what you say adds value. From him, I learned that silence can be a form of respect. When you truly listen to someone, you acknowledge their humanity. You let them feel seen, not merely heard. In a world obsessed with expression, listening becomes a radical act of humility. My mentor's quietness was his message, that influence built on understanding is stronger than influence built on volume. Even now, years after his passing, I still hear his presence in moments of noise. Whenever I'm tempted to respond too quickly, to prove my point, I remember his patient gaze. I remember that wisdom often hides behind stillness, and I recall how his silence transformed rooms, how his few words reshaped conversations. He taught me that influence does not depend on how much you say. It depends on how deeply you understand before you speak. That is the mark of a true Stoic, the power to remain unmoved, attentive, deliberate, to listen so completely that your silence begins to teach others how to listen too. 5. The Stoic practice of deep listening. Every conversation is a mirror. This simple truth hides a profound Stoic insight. When you listen to others, you are also listening to yourself. Each dialogue reveals not just what is being said, but what is stirring within you, your impatience, your biases, your desires to be right or to be admired. The Stoics understood that how we listen is how we live. Attention is a moral act. When you truly listen, you are practicing the art of being present, of suspending judgment, of dwelling in the moment without trying to control it. To listen deeply is to enter a quiet dialogue with the world. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to hear others' words with the spirit of understanding, not contradiction. This is not passive submission, it is active humility. It means setting aside the noise of the ego long enough to perceive reality as it is. In our daily conversations, how often do we really listen? Most of us are half elsewhere, composing replies, defending opinions, or waiting for our turn to speak. The Stoic listener does the opposite. He empties himself the way a vessel must be emptied before it can be filled. Deep listening, then, becomes a form of mindfulness, a Stoic exercise in self-control and awareness. When you listen with full attention, you notice not only the speaker, but your own mind's reactions. You begin to see how quickly it leaps to judgment, how it resists ideas that challenge its comfort. You realize how easily pride interrupts understanding. Each of these moments becomes an opportunity to practice patience and clarity. Seneca wrote that anger often arises from misunderstanding, and misunderstanding from not listening. The cure, therefore, lies not in argument but in quiet attention. To listen well, you must silence the inner voice that constantly demands to be heard. You must learn to pause, to absorb, to ask, what is truly being said here? What truth might I be missing because of my assumptions? In that pause, you cultivate what the Stoics called apatheia, not indifference but serenity in the face of emotion. You become less reactive, more receptive. Deep listening transforms conversation into contemplation. There is also an ethical dimension to it. When you listen, you offer something rare in this world, genuine presence. In a culture that values quick replies over thoughtful ones, the listener becomes a refuge. People open up in the presence of someone who truly hears them. They feel understood, not judged, and through that act, you not only connect with others, you strengthen your own soul. Epictetus said that wisdom begins with the recognition of one's ignorance. Listening is that recognition made manifest. It is a humble admission that you do not yet know everything, and that every person you meet holds a fragment of truth that can expand your understanding. Over time, this practice refines your inner life. You begin to speak less but say more. You start to see how often silence conveys more compassion than advice, how stillness invites trust. The Stoic listener does not seek victory in conversation but harmony. He listens not to win, but to learn, and through that learning, he grows in patience, empathy, and discernment. So let every conversation be a field of practice. When someone speaks, resist the urge to interrupt. When you feel your mind drifting, return to their words as if they were a meditation bell. When you disagree, ask questions instead of preparing rebuttals. This is not weakness, it is discipline. Deep listening, practiced daily, trains the mind in the same way meditation trains the spirit. It reminds you that understanding begins where the self ends. In time, you will find that this practice reshapes not only how you relate to others, but how you experience the world. The more you listen, the more you perceive the subtle music beneath all speech, the emotion, the hope, the fear. You begin to hear life itself, and in that hearing, you discover what the Stoics knew all along, that wisdom is not loud, it listens. So today, try something different. Speak less, listen more, be fully present with the people around you. Because the world doesn't need louder voices, it needs better listeners. If this message resonated with you, subscribe, leave a comment below, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, Those who listen, grow. Those who understand, lead.